So I just saw the new film from director Harmony Korine, AGGRO Drift, and I can't wait to talk to you about this very strange film. Let's get into it. So if you don't know what AGGRO Drift is, this is supposed to be Harmony Korine's attempt at making this kind of new form of media, combining video games and film into one new experience. It feels very, very different. And Harmony Korine has said that this is supposed to represent the potential future of cinema. And if that is the case, oh boy, we have some issues. Now this film, I didn't think it was as bad as what I thought it was going to be, if I'm being honest with you. Harmony Korine is not a filmmaker that is on my wavelength at all. I've only seen one of his films that I really didn't like, which was Spring Breakers. But this just really drew me in because it was trying to do something different and unique. And whether it was going to pull it off or not, I was just very interested to find out. And I really came away from AGGRO Drift really enjoying a lot of aspects to do with this film, while also hating some other aspects. But as an overall experience, I'm really glad that I saw it, and it does feel very unique, and at least tries to do something different, even if it doesn't quite hit the mark a lot of the time. Now, the thing that I think a lot of people will just instantly mention when they just see one image from this movie is the style of the thing. This whole movie is shot in infrared, so it is just very interesting to see a movie go down that route, and it can really work at times. When this really goes big with some of its visual effects and just trying some different things with this color palette, it can be quite a stunning movie at times. There are other times as well where this film looks completely awful with visual effects that just look so outdated and like a bad video game from 15 or so years ago, combining with live action cinema with this infrared just style to it. That is the entire movie. It doesn't deviate from this for 1 minute. And you have to appreciate that kind of commitment, even if it can look pretty silly at times and can be a little bit of an eyesore at moments. But then once again, in other moments, it looks excellent. And that is kind of the narrative around AGGRO Drift for me. It really exceeds and just has some interesting ideas in some moments, and then completely just looks like amateur hour the next. It is equally as frustrating as it can be brilliant. But once again, as an experience, I'm glad that it exists. Now, I would say where the infrared style looks pretty gross is when it has out of focus shots, because when it does that, it almost can make you feel motion sick at points because there's just so much going on and it's out of focus and it looks all muddy and just doesn't quite work as well. Luckily, it doesn't do that all that much, but I did notice that in some of the opening moments of this movie. However, throughout most of its runtime, it is pretty clear, and while it sometimes can be hard to make out certain shapes and things like that, it is really just trying to capture this whole vibes thing. Like, this doesn't really feel like a full, complete movie. It more feels like an experience, and that may sound pretentious or whatever, but when you watch this movie, it just doesn't quite feel like a full film. It just feels like I'm just watching something kind of different that feels so experimental, but once again, doesn't feel like a full feature film. It feels more of a concept. The narrative itself is pretty straightforward. It is pretty dumb. I mean, once again, if this is the future of cinema, then God help me, we have to fix the narratives of the future of cinema, because this thing is as generic as they come. It's about a hitman who is going on a mission. He needs to kill somebody, and he also has a family and a real soft side to him. And a lot of the beats of this movie kind of play out almost exactly as you'd expect. However, there are certain elements that feel like it completely ignores, and there are just so many missed opportunities here, such as the element that he is this barbaric hitman that kills people in some very brutal ways, but yet he has kids and a big booty wife that he loves, and these two elements never quite come together in really any way at all, and that kind of feels a little bit unsatisfying in the grand scheme of things. I felt like you could have gotten more depth from this character if you had combined these elements a little bit more and made these worlds slowly draw closer and closer together. This also has a really bad tendency of just telling you every single thought that this character has. He has this big ego. He thinks he's the world's greatest assassin. Sometimes when he thinks he's in danger, he'll say that. He says how much he loves his family. There's never really a moment where it kind of sells you just from the performance and visual storytelling alone. It is all just this character just spewing dialogue at us and telling us every little thing. It's the same thing with some of the other characters that presents themselves in this story, like Travis Scott's character, who our protagonist has mentored. Now, Travis Scott is all over the marketing of this movie, and I need to tell you right now that he is barely in this thing. He's in it for maybe 10 minutes, and I don't think he's that important in the grand scheme of things. As much as the film tries to convince us that he is, he just doesn't really do anything except for spout a few lines of dialogue and smoke a joint while talking to this character. You don't feel their bond very well. You don't really see too much of how he impacts the story, apart from what it just tells you straight up. So yeah, this narrative is a bit of a mess, but once again, this thing has such a flavor to it, such a personality to it, that some of these elements can be so bad that they feel kind of cool and interesting at the same time. It's really, really weird. I've never felt so confused about how I feel about a movie. It really does feel very singular. And I think if you watch this movie, you might come away really hating this or really loving it. But I think a lot of you are going to be like me, where you're just kind of like, that happened. Then there is the villain, who I just thought was very, very hilarious. I mean, he can be menacing and he's kind of a creep. And it just works to the seediness of this story, which Harmony Korine is really, really good at telling. I guess that is one of his strengths. Once again, I'm not a big fan of his style of filmmaking because I just think it feels like a 15-year-old boy directing a movie rather than a grown man. And that does bleed into this narrative sometimes. And this character especially, I felt that. And I wrote an actual note when I watched this movie, and just talking about this villain. And I just said, imagine Mr. X from Resident Evil 2 if he had a giant sword that he thrusted every 5 seconds. That is this character. I mean, he's just this big brute. There's no depth to him. He's just there to be a menacing kind of character. And there is a great cat and mouse sequence within this movie, within that final act, that I did enjoy, that there was some tension and some real brutality. And sometimes I felt like that infrared vision really worked in the benefit of these moments of the film. I also think stylistically, moments like a gun going off, seeing a bullet leave a gun, looks spectacular in this vision. And I am a little bit disappointed that I didn't get to see this in a theater. It's shot in a 4:3 aspect ratio. And I just think in a theater with great speakers and just a big screen, I think this film would look quite good on that big screen. I purchased it off the Edgelord site, this new production company that he has, and I'm guessing he's going to put all of his new films on there. And I guess sign me up. This thing is interesting enough where I am really keen to see what he wants to do next, and that will be premiering at the Venice Film Festival. Baby Invasion, this first-person shooter perspective where everyone has baby heads. I mean, this thing looks like an absolute trip. But I'm kind of interested to just see where it goes. It's at least different and tries to do something bold and original, no matter how stupid it may be. And I'm definitely not here to defend the artistic merit of this movie, because this thing can be really fucking dumb. Then there are some supporting characters in this as well that have some of the worst dialogue that I've heard in a movie. I mean, there's two in particular that sound like just terrible Skyrim NPCs, just the most rote dialogue possible. And I guess that is Harmony Korine combining the video game and film elements together, but it just takes some of the worst elements of video games with movies and mashes it together, and it just feels awkward. It sounds laughable. I mean, it's like Razzie-worthy performance kind of stuff. It's really bad and it's really funny. But once again, I can't help but feel charmed by that. Lastly, I have to talk about the score because it was really, really good. I mean, it was one of the things that kind of helps immerse you into this film. That and its visual style just really help pull you into this movie. And despite how generic this narrative can feel, you really pick up just some really cool vibes when watching this movie because it has these unique elements with this really interesting score that helps move the narrative along enough. And the protagonist, Bo, I thought he was played really well by Geordie Mola. Like, it's not an Oscar-winning performance or anything like that, but it is solid enough, and his character is somewhat interesting enough, despite how generic the narrative feels, that I just was on board with this journey. I felt kind of immersed in this world a little bit because of its visual style. Look, I'm sorry if I sound really confused when giving this review, but to be honest, I am confused about this movie. Not in terms of what it's presenting or anything like that, but in terms of just how I feel about the thing, because this just feels so different, and it has stuck in my mind both the good and the bad elements of this movie, and that's more than I can say for a lot of other films that feel generic or just a waste. Now, I don't think cinema is dead. I don't think cinema is in need of some grand reinvention, because if you look in the right areas, there are great, innovative films that release every single year. Now, if you look at just big blockbusters, yes, there is a lot to be desired there a lot of the time. But even so, I do feel like that has improved, especially in the last 2 years or so. So for me, Aggro Drift just stands as this very interesting experimental piece that I had fun watching, despite how stupid it could feel, despite the fact that I don't always agree with the directorial style of Harmony Korine or the kinds of narratives that he likes to tell. They just aren't on my wavelength. But this one, I felt like I enjoyed a lot more than something like Spring Breakers. I just thought the experience, some of the innovation visually, the risks it was taking, I was on board for. And I'm happy to see a filmmaker take those kinds of risks. If it works or doesn't work, that's fine. But the fact that there is effort there to do something different felt impressive to me. As a score, I really can't give this anything higher than a 3 out of 5 because there are just so many things in this movie that suck, that make this feel like a terrible movie. I mean, I can understand why the Letterboxd score is the way it is after seeing it. I can understand why someone can really vibe with this and be on board with this new vision in film. But then again, I can really understand the people that think this is the most dumbest shit ever and is nothing more than just superficial level indulgent filmmaking, because that is there too. Both of these things exist within Aggro Drift, and that's what kind of makes it exciting. And I am so on board for Baby Invasion. That thing might be worse, it could be better, I don't know, but I will be watching that movie. And those are my thoughts towards Aggro Drift. If you've seen the movie, let me know what you think about it in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'd love to have a discussion, a polite discussion, hopefully. Remember to like and subscribe, and if you really love this channel, please consider joining and becoming a member. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.